George Elguyer.
Tonight at 6, the lawyer who made his name accusing British soldiers of human rights abuses in Iraq is struck off. Phil Shiner is found guilty of dishonesty. He paid thousands to get a witness to change his evidence.
He's made soldiers' lives a misery over the last few years. I think the decent thing now would be for him to apologise properly.
Iraq war veterans say it was demoralising to be accused of torture and murder.
It's certainly been very difficult. It's put a lot of stress on my family, and I have had to go through a number of investigations, tribunals, cross examinations, which of course are all very stressful events.
We'll be asking where this leaves other investigations into claims of abuse in Iraq. Also tonight, where's the Brexit effect? Shoppers drive the economy on as the Bank of England upgrades its economic forecast again. Meanwhile, the government publishes its plan for Brexit and promises new laws on immigration. The former head of a Christian holiday camp is accused of abusing boys. The church admits it failed terribly. Light at the end of the tunnel, a deal with drivers in the Southern Rail dispute, but one union is still holding out.
Tonight on BBC London, the Academy facing special measures after a draft Ofsted report published in error rates it inadequate. And time for your say about a third runway at Heathrow Airport as a government consultation gets underway.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. Numerous cases involving claims of abuse by British soldiers have been called into question after the lawyer behind them was struck off today. Phil Shiner made his name as a human rights lawyer, bringing claims of murder and torture against Iraq war veterans. Today, a tribunal found he'd acted dishonestly, spending thousands of pounds to find clients and encouraging a witness to change his evidence. The Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, said he should apologise to the soldiers. Here's our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale.
Once an award-winning human rights lawyer, tonight Phil Shiner's reputation lies in tatters. He made his name at the expense of the British armies and the taxpayer, accusing soldiers of widespread abuse during the Iraq War.
I don't know whether people were killed, but I think something went wrong. We need to find out who was responsible and who in command knew what on earth was going on here. They were kept naked, they were sexually humiliated.
Today, a tribunal upheld 12 charges of misconduct against him, including 5 charges of acting dishonestly. He was ordered to pay £250,000. He's been struck off and will never work as a lawyer again. The tribunal also heard Shiner paid an Iraqi agent more than £1.5 million to knock on doors, trawling for business. This was the aftermath of the incident that proved his undoing. The Battle of Danny Boy in Iraq in 2004.
It culminated with soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, fixing bayonets and fighting through heavily defended enemy positions.
Acts of bravery, though, were soon followed by allegations that they murdered, mutilated and tortured Iraqis. A 5-year inquiry costing £30 million found those claims were built on lies and without foundation.
The process of going through the last 10 years has put a great deal of stress on my family, particularly who found it difficult to understand why the process was being applied in the way it was, and to my soldiers and their families as well.
What do you want from Phil Shiner now?
I'd simply ask him to apologise to soldiers and families that have been put through the stresses and strains of the last decade.
There is proof of mistreatment by British soldiers. It was Phil Shiner who highlighted the case of Baha Musa, an Iraqi hotel worker battered to death in British custody. But it was just one of the hundreds of allegations he made.
British Army standards are some of the highest in the world. He's caused a great deal of misery, and I'm pleased now at least that we see justice being done.
The Prime Minister too has promised to end what she calls an industry of vexatious claims against British troops, though dozens of allegations of historic abuse are still being investigated. But for Phil Shiner, this is the end of his career. A man who once sought the limelight, but who's now gone to ground. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Well, with me is our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley. Caroline, I wonder what effect this might have on any outstanding cases against British soldiers.
Well, it's a good question because in all, Phil Shiner brought more than 2,000 claims of abuse against British soldiers. Some have already been dismissed, but it was the sheer volume of claims and the fact that Phil Shiner had asked the International Criminal Court to investigate that led to the government setting up a major investigation called the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, looking into these claims of abuse. We have had a statement this afternoon from that investigation I had, and it says that the evidence presented at the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal against Phil Shiner casts serious doubt on the reliability of some of the remaining allegations, and they're now trying to work out which of the allegations brought by Phil Shiner's firm should now be investigated. But don't think that the end of Phil Shiner's career means that we've necessarily heard the end of abuse in Iraq, because among that massive claims, I've been told there are some that are serious and are deemed to be credible.
All right, Caroline, thank you very much. Thank you. The Bank of England has had to revise its economic forecast again. It now says the UK's economy will grow by 2% this year and will continue to grow for a further 2 years. That's a contrast to previous predictions of a slowdown after the EU referendum vote. But as our economics editor Kamal Ahmed reports, there are warnings about rising inflation. His report does contain some flashing images.
We're still spending. Employment is rising.
The Bank of England cuts interest rates.
Borrowing has become cheaper. And today, the governor even nodded to the new president and his plans to boost the US economy. All reasons for the significant upgrade of Britain's growth forecast. The governor admitted that consumers had shrugged off any Brexit gloom.
Consumers have not been affected by any of the associated uncertainty around Brexit. And that is, to a large degree, understandable. I mean, the labour market is still holding up. Wages are growing roughly the same rate, modestly, but roughly the same rate as they had in the past. And in part because of our actions, credit is available and it's cheap.
These UK growth upgrades are some of the fastest the bank has ever published. Last November, it said growth for 2017 would languish at 1.4%. That figure has been raised to 2%. For 2018, it originally said growth would be 1.5%. That has also been increased, more modestly, to 1.6%. Mixed in with the good news, some caution. For this small food firm in Kent, inflation is on the up, driven by the fall in the value of sterling. The price of goods Nimisha Raja buys have increased by 25%.
For the moment, we're able to absorb the prices. We're not passing it on to the retailer, and therefore that's not being passed on to the end consumer. When we do need to pass on the price, I don't know whether it's going to reach the end consumer, depending on what the retailer's views are.
And as the pressures build, might the bank have to reach for that cooling button, an interest rate rise?
Is there more of a risk of an interest rate rise than there is of a further interest rate cut?
If we do see a situation where there is faster growth in wages than we anticipate, or that spending doesn't decelerate later in the year, one could anticipate that there would be an adjustment of interest rates, an increase in interest rates. That is not a signal.
Here at the Bank of England, the governor struck a pretty upbeat note today, but there are still warning lights flashing in this inflation report. The amount we are saving has fallen to historic lows, and that could be a problem if the economy does take a turn for the worse. I think the bank here is still nervous. Yes, there is better news, but as the governor said, we have only just started our journey to Brexit.
On growth, it's been a roller coaster ride for the bank, a sharp change in direction to positive. Consumer debts, though, are high and savings are low. That positive news will need to keep flowing if the UK is to keep prospering. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
The government has published its official policy document setting out its plans for Brexit. The White Paper lays out 12 guiding principles, including migration control and withdrawal from the single market. Labour said the document had been produced too late for any meaningful scrutiny. Our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, reports.
Be ambitious, be positive about Britain's future outside the European Union. That's the message from ministers who say they're aiming for a strong new partnership with the EU.
Secretary David Davis.
The man charged with achieving that told the Commons that the referendum was not a vote to turn our back on Europe.
It was a vote of confidence in the UK's ability to succeed in the world and an expression of optimism that our best days are still to come. Whatever the outcome of our negotiations, we seek a more open, outward-looking, confident and fairer UK that works for everyone.
Under pressure to reveal more, the government's published some Brexit plans. Priorities include putting Parliament in control of our laws, making immigration decisions in the UK with a new system that'll be phased in over time, continuing security cooperation with the EU, and establishing the freest possible trading relationship with EU countries. Theresa May's already announced that the UK will leave the single market, but today's document says she'll seek a special arrangement for key industries such as car manufacturers and financial services. MPs are demanding that Parliament is regularly consulted when negotiations get underway.
So there's no point in having a vote after he's already signed it off with the European Union, treating Parliament as some sort of afterthought.
MPs are demanding a say on the deal that Theresa May does with the European Union. They want the power to order her back to Brussels if they think it's not good enough. But before Labour can focus on that fight, they're going to have to get over a few problems of their own.
Is Brexit splitting Labour, Mr Corbyn?
The Labour leader ordered his MPs not to block the Brexit process last night, but dozens disobeyed, some resigning from his shadow cabinet. Jeremy Corbyn couldn't even rely on one of his closest allies, Diane Abbott. She was taken ill shortly after this debate,
So of course the government
and just before the crucial vote, and had to go home. But some colleagues don't believe her.
It is extraordinary that Diane Abbott sneaks off saying that she's ill. You know, people who are well enough at 5 o'clock to be in Parliament are well enough to be there for the vote at 7 o'clock. I think we know what's going on here. She bottled the vote.
Tonight, Malta is preparing to host a summit of all 28 EU leaders. Theresa May's set out her intentions. She'll leave early so everyone else can discuss their Brexit tactics. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
A deal has been agreed between Southern Rail and the train drivers' union ASLEF, bringing to an end part of the dispute that's caused months of disruption to one of the main commuter routes into London. But the deal leaves unresolved a separate disagreement between Southern and a different union representing conductors. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
It's the bitter dispute causing disruption that's changed lives, forcing some commuters to look for new jobs, costing businesses millions, at times paralysing one of the country's busiest lines. But tonight, Southern Rail's finally struck a deal with its drivers. Passengers going home couldn't be happier.
Did you know that the Southern Rail strike, they've come to a deal in the last hour or so? I was just wondering if you...
No, I hadn't heard that, but thank you, that's terrific news.
Pleased to hear it. It's been very disruptive. It's ruined my journeys for the last little while, so pleased to hear it.
It's been absolute hell for the last kind of 12 months and it's impacted on a lot of things and a lot of people. But yes, it's good that they finally arrived at a deal. Shame it took so long.
The row was over who does this, the safety-critical job of shutting the train doors. Southern wants drivers, not onboard conductors, doing it. The unions claimed that wasn't safe and threatened jobs. Neither side will give details, but both seem happy with today's deal.
It's a very fair one. There's been some give and take on both sides, but the big win is for the passengers. They have suffered enough, and we want to make sure that we get back to as good a service as we possibly can as soon as we can.
Well, after the past year and where we've been, we very welcome that we've actually come to a consensus that we've got something to offer our membership that we believe will help deliver a safer railway.
The union will now put the agreement to its members, but says it's confident they'll agree. So it took 2 weeks of what I'm told was very intense negotiating inside this building, but Southern Rail does seem to have reached a deal with its drivers, and both sides say they're happy. Of course, ASLEF wasn't the only union involved in this dispute, so it doesn't end here. The RMT union isn't part of this deal. It represents conductors and could still announce more strikes, knocking out a third of services each time. So the pain isn't quite over for Southern's long-suffering passengers. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
The inquests into the deaths of 30 British tourists killed in the Tunisian beach terror attack of 2015 have been hearing about the last moments of a 24-year-old woman from Lincolnshire. Carly Lovett ran into the hotel in Sousse with her fiancé after hearing the sound of shooting, but the gunman followed her into the building. In all, 38 people lost their lives in the attack. From court, Sarah Campbell reports.
The final moments of all 30 Britons killed that day have now been told to the inquest, and tributes paid to the individuals behind the photographs. 24-year-old Carly Lovett was a fashion photographer who'd recently become engaged to her childhood sweetheart Liam. This would be their first holiday on their own. 2 days after they arrived, they were caught up in the attack carried out by Saifedean Rezki. As the gunman approached from the beach, this animation shown to the court shows the route Carly and Liam took to try and escape through a back area normally used by admin staff. But the gunman followed and Carly was shot. As Liam tried desperately to save his fiancée, the gunman moved on. Cheryl Stollery, seen here on the right of the picture, was by the pool with her husband John. She described the panic as gunfire sounded, the pushing and shoving as people ran. They found themselves in the front of the hotel. She saw the gunman and realised John was no longer running behind her, but was on the floor. "I screamed, 'John,'" Mrs. Stollery told the inquest. Although his eyes were open, there was nothing there. A few yards away, cowering behind a car, was Chris Dyer and his wife, Gina Van Dort. "I saw the shooter coming towards where we were," Ms. Van Dort's statement read. "He was in my sight, looking towards us." Chris was killed. Gina was shot but told the court she's recovering well despite her life-changing injuries. Through these 30 individual inquests, the full horror has unfolded of an attack which lasted less than an hour, but which destroyed families and lives. And at the centre of it, a gunman, who many of the survivors have described as showing little emotion, even smiling, as he calmly walked around the hotel and its grounds. Stuart Cullen, the final British victim. Already injured by an explosive device, the gunman approached him and his wife. Mrs. Cullen, seen here on the right, listened as her statement was read. Her desperate pleas not to shoot were ignored by the gunman. She survived, but told the inquest her life and happiness died the day her husband did. Sarah Campbell, BBC News, at the Royal Courts of Justice.
And the time is 17 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The lawyer who made his name accusing Iraq war veterans of abuse is struck off for dishonesty, and still to come. One possible solution to the shortage of affordable housing in the English countryside.
Later on BBC London, why Prince Harry is encouraging London ambulance staff to talk about their mental health issues. And we'll be live at St Paul's Cathedral, where the Bishop of London will be delivering his final public service.
The Church of England has admitted it failed terribly after allegations of historical physical abuse made against a former colleague of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, weren't reported to the police. It's alleged John Smythe beat teenage boys during summer camps he ran in the 1970s. Police have appealed for possible victims to come forward, as our religious affairs correspondent Martin Bashir reports.
I'm John Smythe.
John Smythe QC, now working in South Africa, is at the centre of allegations involving the abuse of young boys during the 1970s at a series of summer camps in Dorset.
People matter to us very much.
The camps, which take place every summer, involved boys from the top private schools in the country. They'd engage in activities during the day and then hear talks about the Christian faith during the evening. According to allegations made by Channel 4 News, John Smythe began the abuse by grooming boys at camp, then inviting them to his home in Winchester, where they would be stripped naked and subjected to beatings. The Ewan Trust, which oversaw the camps, was made aware of the allegations in 1982, but failed to inform the police. One of Smythe's leadership team says it was the victims themselves who did not want to report the abuse.
We discussed
telling the police. I wasn't part of that discussion. But the young men themselves didn't want to have their names mentioned. They had suffered enough at John Smythe's hands without wanting to the indignity of describing everything in court.
At the time, the Church of England had no safeguarding policy in place. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who also worked alongside John Smythe, says he knew nothing of the alleged abuse until 2013.
I was 19, 20 years old. I was a junior leader in a camp. These were the senior leaders. I wasn't part of the inner circle.
Late this afternoon, one of Mr. Smythe's daughters gave the BBC an interview in which she says that her father should be held to account for his actions.
I will always love my father. However, if these allegations are true, I do think he will have to face justice, and that will be painful for everyone involved. But I believe strongly in justice, and I would want that for someone who had done that to my child.
We approached Mr. Smythe at his home in Cape Town, South Africa, but he refused to answer our questions. We spoke to a man who would not go on camera, but says that John Smythe asked him intimate questions and then subjected him to beatings. His story confirms other accounts given to broadcasters and newspapers, accounts that will be investigated by Hampshire Police. Martin Bashir, BBC News.
Scotland's budget has been voted through today, and it means that higher rate taxpayers in Scotland will pay up to £400 more than their counterparts elsewhere in the UK. The change follows a deal struck between the SNP, which does not have a majority, and the Green Party. Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith is in Edinburgh for us. Over to you, Sarah.
Well, the SNP faced the prospect today of not being able to get their budget passed, and it is the first budget since the Scottish Parliament took control of setting income taxes. They had to do a last-minute deal with the Scottish Greens, which will see higher rate taxpayers in Scotland, that's anyone earning over £43,000 a year, paying around £400 a year more in income tax than someone on the same salary living south of the border would pay. The Scottish Conservatives say that this makes Scotland the highest taxed part of the United Kingdom. But the SNP say the tax changes, which amount to about £7.70 a week, are less than the cost of a single prescription charge in England. And they point out that Scottish taxpayers do get free prescriptions as well as free university tuition fees and free personal care for the elderly. So they say it does add up to a good deal.
Sarah, thank you. Britain's housing crisis is well documented, and in the countryside there are warnings that whole villages are at risk because of a lack of affordable homes. Now a scheme in Shropshire is trying to change that, the first of its kind in England. It offers local people the opportunity to build a single house on greenbelt land. But as Sophie Long reports, there are conditions.
I was brought up here and I always wanted to live back here and realised the only way for us to afford to do it was to build our own house.
Yeah, it's taken a long time.
There's been a few times where you just think, oh, just give up.
This is all going to be a patio area.
Kylie and Chris wanted their young boys to enjoy the same rural upbringing that they had. The Shropshire Single Plot Exemption Scheme was the only way they could afford to do that. But it's been tough. To do it, you have to fulfil strict criteria.
It was hard because the locals all wanted us as well.
Yeah, we had a lot of local support.
Everybody in the parish signed something saying, we want you. We need young families to keep our schools and our doctors' surgeries and everything going. And the powers above them, we couldn't do it.
They eventually got permission, then they had to get funding. It's taken them 6 years to get to this stage, 2 of them living in a cold caravan.
Chris told me about a year.
I said 12 to 18 months.
He didn't say 18 months.
What's happened to the caravan now?
We've torched it.
It's taken blood, sweat and tears and rocked their relationship, but they have their home. They are living their rural dream. But there's a catch.
This is all area of outstanding natural beauty.
Councillor Cecilia Motley is one of the driving forces behind the scheme. She tells me Kylie and Chris will never be able to sell their home at full market value.
That is actually one of the strengths of the scheme. You have to sell it at 60% roughly of market rate. So that therefore is a bit of a disincentive, and it will tend therefore that either people will be willing to pass them on to other families in housing need who also have local connections, or if they do sell them, they have to accept the fact they're not going to get the full price for them.
More than 350 families have done it in Shropshire. It means the council here is slowly building up its supply of affordable housing at no cost to the taxpayer. And they're keeping their villages alive. Now other local authorities are looking to do the same thing. Sophie Long, BBC News, South Shropshire.
Now, as we've been reporting, President Donald Trump is not afraid of picking fights. Well, today his latest target is none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger. The one-time Terminator replaced Donald Trump on the Celebrity Apprentice show. The US president said ratings had dived since the Hollywood star took over.
When I ran for president, I had to leave the show. That's when I knew for sure I was doing it. And they hired a big movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to take my place. And we know how that turned out. The ratings went right down the tubes. It's been a total disaster.
But Arnold Schwarzenegger was quick to respond to the US president on his Twitter page and suggested a job swap.
Hey Donald, I have a great idea. Why don't we switch jobs? You take over TV because you're such an expert in ratings, and I take over your job. And then people can finally sleep comfortably again.
Touché. Time for a look at the weather now with Helen Willett. Hello.
Hello there, George. We've been talking all about storms, haven't we, here on the weather for all week. And I just want to show you the satellite picture. It's lined up with bands of cloud. This low pressure here, this huge swathe of cloud, fills most of the North Atlantic. It has been giving the west of Wales, southwest England, a real battering with those winds. And a few more hours of that to come on this low pressure. This is tomorrow's, which still looks now as if it's heading towards the southern UK, but it'll affect France as well, northern France. So some severe gales potentially continuing to whip up the Irish Sea. Look, a lovely picture sent in from our weather watcher there in Belfast. Contrast with, well, further east, the North Sea, a much calmer looking picture. It has been a windy day throughout the UK, but it's just windier up the western side of the country. Further showers to come overnight, and with the wind, hopefully it should be largely frost-free, a tad chilly out in the countryside. And actually not a bad start to our Friday. Got some rain to clear in the north, some decent spells of sunshine coming through, but already the changes afoot. That next low pressure is coming into the south and west fairly early on, with another bout of gales or severe gales coming in, but temperatures just a tad down on those of today. So let's talk about the storm that we've been talking about, if you like, because it still looks as if it's on to affect northern France, the Channel Islands and some parts of the southern half